There's another shadow, Mr. Flanagan, please.
Thank you very much. First off, I want to say I find this process very interesting, and it's a great way to hold people to account. And I'm also a member of the Agri Committee, and there is concern within the Agri Committee about levels of spending dropping, and how do we make sure that that doesn't continue to happen. And I suppose the phrase that was used by the Commissioner, that citizens need to trust a policy, I suppose that, well, I don't think that is the core of it, because the money initially comes out of citizens' pockets, whether they be farmers, whether they be doctors, whether they be people in general. It originally comes out of people's pockets, and no more than if you go into a shop, you want to guarantee good money and you monitor that yourself. Obviously people can't do that when the money goes into the general taxation system, so they rely on us, and for citizens to trust that policy, it's got to make sense. And one thing that doesn't seem to make sense to me is in relation to the error rate, and it's been stated numerous times that on Pillar 1 there's a 2.2% error rate, and on Pillar 2 a 5.3% error rate. The question I have is, if that is the case, and it obviously is the case, why are we simplifying or making Pillar 1 as a priority to simplify before Pillar 2? Because a lot of the problems here are caused by a lack of simplification and a lack of clarity. So if you've got a bigger error rate in Pillar 2, obviously you try and do something about that first. Why isn't the priority given on that? But I think there's been a lot of talk about that, all right, and it is important. Of course it's important. Every last cent is important. But in comparison to a fair distribution of CAP in general, it is minuscule. It's like worrying about a drip in your tap while the river bursts its borders and comes for your children in the garden. I think it's fairly obvious what the priority is. You look at the big thing. And when it comes to citizens' trust in a policy, how can they trust a policy, for example, in Ireland, where 80% of the CAP, which comes out of everybody's pockets, and we're net contributors now, so more of it comes out of our pockets. 80% of that CAP, even after the review, Mr Keolis warned about a fig leaf when it came to convergence. We got a tea leaf in Ireland, and sad to say, now Commissioner Hogan was in government in Ireland when that happened. Now, some people might say, well, you know, that's to encourage people to produce. Well, these 80% of farmers happen to be the farmers that got the 80% of the money. They happen to be the richest 20% of farmers. But did they produce more goods than anyone else? They actually only produced 30%. So if it was about production, which is not meant to be, but if that was the argument, that goes out the window. So in the midterm review, is there going to be a midterm review? And in that midterm review, will there be a real drive to change this? And I know, I hear people at national, state level, they want to change it. But what can the Commission do to make a common agricultural policy common? Because there's nothing common about this system. I tried to introduce it into the competition policy opinion, that it was actually perverting competition as well, which it is. We need something done about this, because it can't be justified. I represent people on farms, I represent people off farms, in towns, and for them to hear, well, this makes sense, that the Queen of the United Kingdom, I said England at an earlier meeting and I got pulled up by Ms Stuart Agnew, but the fact that the Queen in England can get massive payments and someone in England, another farmer in England, can't get virtually anything, or the king of the beef industry in Ireland can get 400,000 or 500,000 a year, you can't stand by that. And eventually this house of cards is going to collapse, because there's less money around and people are asking questions. So the question I'm asking is, what will be done in the midterm review to avoid further downward pressure? And the final question, and it was mentioned by the Court of Auditors, that next year we'll be looking at greening and how the money is spent in the 2016 report. Well, I'm wondering what will be done to avert a disaster, as far as I can see, when you start looking at what's happening. I know in my country what's happening anyway, a thing called variable greening. And how do you explain to the European citizen who pays this money how one farmer under variable greening could get €330 per hectare and his neighbour could get €10 per hectare? Making the statement that you can do it for €10, well, why can't the other guy do it for €10? And what questions are going to be asked about that? I brought it up at a meeting with DG Agri, and I have to say, the eyes nearly dropped out of one of the people's heads at the meeting when I mentioned I was going to bring it up at the Budget Control Committee. Because how can you justify one person getting 33 times more than his neighbour for doing the same thing? So what's going to be done to stop what I would call perverse practices within member states that we cannot justify here when we go back to the public and tell them how this money is being spent? So an answer to those questions. Thank you.
Deputy Flanagan, the reasons for the high rate in Pillar 2 are along the lines I mentioned in my answer, which was it's a more targeted programmed, obviously, allocation of finances. You know, it deals with areas around the environment and climate, but also community-led development initiatives, which have a particular issues about public procurement which we're quite concerned about. And on a regular basis, unfortunately, we come across these particular problems, and the Court has quite rightly brought these to our attention, and we're working with Member States to see can we do better in order to reduce the error in these areas arising from this specific issue. I mentioned earlier about the capping was proposed by the Commission, rejected by the co-legislators on the last occasion. We will try again, and we will see what will happen in the future. It's an area-based payment, and this explains why it's based on land. We don't decide who owns the land, but if you obviously have a larger producer, a larger number of acres or hectares, you're going to get more payments. But there's a cap that we proposed on the last occasion, and this wasn't accepted to co-legislators. Again, these are opportunities that will arise in 2017 in terms of whether you want a flat rate, whether you want a modulated rate, or areas or issues of digressivity or capping. Everybody will get an opportunity to put forward that view. What we're not doing a full mid-term review of the CAP, but as you know, DG Budge are coordinating with all of the committees of the House an omnibus regulation, and you will see that we have a list of issues that are applicable to agriculture which we have submitted for consideration. And the DG Agri will be looking at these issues in a very serious way, amending if appropriate, and it will come before the budget, the full Parliament in due course through the trialogue mechanism and the four sectoral committees that you've established. But the issue about you know, what money we'll have in the future is actually another day's work, and that won't the European Council have to decide all that in due course. But I cannot predict the outcome of that, as you would expect.
Just a clarification on. You've said there will be no full mid-term review, and that's disappointing. I'm getting mixed messages when you then say, in relation to flattening, it will arise again in 2017. And Mr. Gerbrandy mentioned then that will be another 5 years. Is that it? There will be no review, proper full mid-term review, where MEPs will get a chance to put right the wrong that they did the last time, and to make flattening more likely. Is this going to be included in some form of mid-term review? Like when you say it will arise in 2017, is this as a build-up to the next package after this one is finished?
Well, Mr. Flanagan, if you make a proposal today, it will come into force about 2019. So if we do it as part of the opportunity you have in 2017 is the omnibus regulation, and that presents a suite of proposals that will go to ComAgri, which can be subject to amendment. So you know you have an opportunity there, but it's not in the normal sense of what they would call a fully fledged mid-term review of all aspects of our policies. It's what we are proposing with DG Budget, which covers many other DGs other than agriculture, in addition to agriculture, that we feel are priorities that we can get through in 2017, pending then a full modernisation and simplification of the policy, which we will start to discuss in January 2017. There will be a public consultation for from January to April that will allow all stakeholders to have an opportunity to say what they feel is appropriate. But that won't come into effect post-2020. And of course, as you know, better than anybody, Brexit comes into play then in terms of the implications for money and the implications for policy.